Hasina, I have listed some of the statistics which, by any stretch of imagination, are absolutely staggering and paint a devastating picture. The US-based Committee to Protect Journalists, or CPJ, has said that the first 10 weeks of the war have been the deadliest that have been recorded for journalists. 61 out of 68 of those journalists who were killed in Gaza were Palestinian. The CPJ says the Israel-Gaza war is the most dangerous situation for journalists that we've ever seen. The Israeli army has killed more journalists in 10 weeks than any other army or entity has in any single year. And then there are reports or analyses that suggest that the Israeli military campaign in Gaza is amongst the deadliest and most destructive in recent history. In just over 2 months, the Israeli offensive has wreaked more destruction in Gaza than the razing of Syria's Aleppo, Mariupol in Ukraine, and the Allied bombing of Germany in World War II. In fact, the Israeli offensive has killed more civilians in Gaza than the US-led coalition did in its 3-year campaign against the Islamic State. And we're talking about a 2-month-old war. Your thoughts on these staggering figures, Hasina? Could you please unmute yourself?
What is happening at this moment is truly a human right violation in the 21st century. I think as a global phenomena, as everybody is watching the news, it's reading every day, the devastation that's happening every day completely needs the voices from around the world. I think when we talk about the United Nations and the way they are going to be responding to it, I think the world will have to come together to ensure that children and women who are completely in a situation where their rights are completely violated. I mean, if you're looking at the food, the needs for food, hunger is one aspect of rights that requires immediate interventions. And what is happening out here is devastating to see, that the number that is increasing every day, but the response is still very staggering from around the world. And I think it's time that the UN brings all the member countries together to take a stand that in the 21st century, you cannot see it, you cannot allow any kind of violation such as what is happening. You cannot allow people dying of starvation. You cannot allow people being at risk, especially women and girls, looking at from their rights and the perspective.
Okay, Dr. Ido Zelkovich, let me come to you. I have mentioned these statistics about how this war has proven to be the deadliest for journalists in recent history. Experts believe it has been most destructive in terms of the number of civilian casualties compared to almost in every other war that we've seen in decades, not just in years. And one more statistic that I want to share with you and the viewers, that more than 500,000 people in Gaza, that's 1/4 of the population, are starving according to the UN, and that the extent of the hunger among the population is worse than the famines that we've seen in Afghanistan and Yemen in recent years. The risk of famine in Gaza is increasing every day. The UN World Food Programme says it doesn't get any worse. We've not seen something on this scale and at this speed anywhere else. So my question to you is, how much worse do you think it is going to get for the people of Gaza before they get any kind of respite? Yes, we've heard those arguments that Hamas is to blame, Hamas started this war, we must finish, as in Israel must finish this war by finishing off Hamas, this, that and the other. But while Hamas is a terror organization that cares neither about Israeli lives nor, I dare say, about Palestinian lives, Israel is a civilized liberal democracy which is expected to do better than a terror organization. But look at these statistics. They're telling.
Unfortunately, and I say really, unfortunately, Hamas brought a terrible disaster on the Gaza Strip, and all of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are suffering because of this terrorist regime. During these very hard times, Israel is operating according to the lines of the international law. I don't know another stories in world history that a country that have been attacked in the war, in the war, let humanitarian supply goes inside the Gaza Strip on a daily basis. You can see all of the trucks that goes from the Egyptian borders are entering into the Gaza Strip, bringing food and water and even fuel that have been taken by Hamas terrorist regime in order to serve its military infrastructures. Israel do it, even it's going against its own strategic needs. I will not say there is no humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. There is a humanitarian crisis, and most of the people in Israel feeling very, very sorry for this humanitarian crisis. But Hamas terrorist regime is the one to blame. When you are in a war, you should operate according to the international law, but there is only one main goal that you should achieve, and this is the win. According to the numbers that you have been quoted, I want to add some notes. First, we should remember that Hamas is operating in a civil clothes and inside the population itself. We know, according to the Israeli intelligence and other military experts around the world, that Hamas casualties is around between 8,500 to 9,000. So this one number that we should take in mind when we are talking about casualties and the number of deaths in the Gaza Strip. Another number that we should also take into account, and I say it very, very, and another number we should take into account, and I said it with a great sorrow. I mean, as a human being, I feel a great sorrow for every person that have been killed or injured in this war. But Hamas working in a cynical way. If you're talking about journalists that have been killed and the numbers are pretty high, one should also remember that some of these journalists, in brackets, are part of Hamas mechanism. Some of them came with Hamas in the 7th of October into Israeli soil to document their terrible massacre. They are part of Hamas mechanism. Hamas also, by the way, got its own 3 different channels: TV, radio station, and independent news agencies that serve them. So those journalists, some of them, not all of them, but one must also remember, with all the respect I said it, that some of the journalists that have been killed found their death actually when they served the true master, Hamas. Beside it, I feel very sorry for every journalist that have been killed. This is a huge tragedy that Hamas brought on the Gaza Strip when they decided on the eve of 7th of October to massacre Israeli civilians and to try to create a genocide on the southern border of Israel.
You know, I, of course, agree wholeheartedly that what the Hamas terrorists did on the 7th of October was absolutely horrific. They butchered 1,200 Israelis in the most brutal manner possible. However, 2 wrongs don't make a right. You know, if we talk about 1,200 Israeli lives versus 20,000 Palestinian lives, I mean, the question that many will ask is, if Israeli lives matter, so should Palestinian lives. The number is absolutely staggering, even if Israel goes on disputing those figures. Let's not forget that there are agencies like the United Nations that are also working there on the ground. So let me take this to Irina Sukerman. Irina Sukerman, you know, I have talked about how this war, which is barely 10 weeks old, has proved to be the deadliest ever for journalists. It's proved to be the deadliest war in recent global history, worse than the Allied bombing of Germany in World War II. And a vast majority of Gazans are on the verge of starvation. There might be a famine in the Gaza Strip soon. The UN World Food Programme says we've not seen anything like this before. And no matter how much Israelis dispute these figures, 20,000 people dead and counting. My question simply is, Irina, whatever the stated objective of Israel, and we know what happened on the 7th of October, how much longer do you think Israel will be able to justify this military campaign, which has already taken the lives of over 20,000 Palestinians, as some believe in revenge for 1,200 Israeli lives? Why do Palestinian lives not matter?
Thank you very much. And I'd be the first to say that Palestinians' lives very much matter, and it is unfortunate that they're being used as pawns by Hamas, but not only by Hamas, but by the choir of amplifiers of Hamas propaganda, which actually prevents Palestinians from getting the help that they need. Any humanitarian report is only as good as its sources and the credibility of the organizations that put them out. So let's look at the report that you've cited. First, it relies heavily, I would say completely, on Hamas-produced figures. As we have discussed many times before, Hamas is not a credible source of information about figures because it has every incentive to grossly inflate numbers. It has absolutely no way of verifying the number of deaths as quickly as it claims as it does, and it's almost inevitably claims that 99% of those killed are women and children, which is simply impossible, as we have heard from the previous guest. Thousands of fighters have been killed as well. We also know that Hamas has been deliberately not wearing uniforms in Gaza, so it is impossible to distinguish between civilians and fighters much of the time. The second issue comes to the credibility of the Committee to Protect Journalists, and I would say that this is an organization that has not provided any evidence of Israel's deliberate targeting of journalists or their families. So without evidence, we cannot evaluate how much of it is unfortunate coincidence and how much of it is actually deliberate operations by Hamas to inflate their figures. Furthermore, Committee to Protect Journalists has a record of bias, not only towards Israel, but towards other issues. They were involved in the production of a documentary called The Dissident, which told the story of Jamal Khashoggi. And a large part of the documentary relied heavily on accounts by the Turkish intelligence, which was accused of covering up, of knowing of what was going on and not getting involved. A Committee to Protect Journalists that had whose responsibility it is to question countries with a record of targeting journalists, such as Turkey, not only cooperated with Turkish intelligence, not known for its humanitarianism, but actually allowed a conflicted actor to play a role in a huge controversy involving the life of someone they elevated to the status of a journalist, in their own words. So this is an organization with a record of working with incredible actors to produce outright propaganda. So in this instance, I would also not take their comments seriously. Third, who are the journalists who have been killed? It's not only that they were part of Hamas apparatus, it's that many of them belonged to Al Jazeera, which is a Qatar-funded state media apparatus with a long history, not only in Israel and Gaza, but in other places around the world, such as Afghanistan, of deliberately using journalists as operatives to carry information, intelligence information.
Irina, are you seriously suggesting that Al Jazeera journalists have been working at the behest of terror organizations and therefore they deserve to die?
They don't deserve to die, but they have been maliciously used by their organizations. And there have been reports from former journalists accusing Al Jazeera of putting the lives of these journalists in danger and using them as political operatives. Many of these journalists are not, most of these journalists are not Qatari. They're Palestinian, Lebanese, Syrian, Egyptian, and so forth. These are people from poor families who rely on their income to support them. But Al Jazeera leaves them with no choice but to place their lives in danger and act as political